Marvel/DC, The Underground Doctor. Chapter 21, A Rainy Night of Murder. Gotham East District, an abandoned underground garage. A strong smell of engine oil mixed with the pungent scent of blood. Overhead, an incandescent lamp covered in insect carcasses swayed back and forth, casting long, distorted shadows on the ground. Bang! A dull gunshot echoed through the enclosed underground room. The thug whose jaw William had smashed with his umbrella handle had his head shattered instantly. Red and white viscous matter splattered onto the oil-stained load-bearing pillar, slowly sliding down the peeling wall. Rat Gang boss Fifth holstered his smoking M1911 pistol and casually wiped a bloodstain off the back of his hand onto a nearby lackey's clothes. He was a bald, burly man nearly 2 meters tall, with a rat totem on his neck extending to the corner of his eye, splitting a hideous scar in two. Fifth spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva, not even glancing at the headless corpse on the ground. So damn noisy. He turned his head to stare at the other two cripples kneeling and trembling on the ground. One had 9 tendons in his wrist precisely severed by a scalpel, while the other had a comminuted fracture of the radius. Fifth's eyes twitched violently, the flesh on his face bunching together. An Asian black market doctor with an umbrella? And he took Selina and her sickly sister away. The thug with the severed wrist banged his head into a puddle of oil, his voice trembling. Why yes, boss. That guy is weird. He knows every bone in the human body. One cut and I was finished. Fuck your bones. Fifth kicked the thug in the ribs. A crackling sound followed, and the thug rolled away screaming, hitting a pile of abandoned tires and falling silent. Fifth's chest heaved. Although his rat gang wasn't the top name in the Gotham East District, he was given some respect even by low-level codders of the Maroney family because he supplied live subjects to the underground organ black market. Now, some barefoot doctor with a scalpel who appeared out of nowhere had not only snatched the woman he wanted but also crippled 3 of his men. Most importantly, if he couldn't hand over the Selina sisters tonight, the middleman from the organ black market would definitely not let him off. Fifth grinned, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth, and walked to the back of the garage, kicking open several wooden crates covered in tarps. A monster with a scalpel. A crowbar pried open a rusted metal lid. Inside were over 20 gleaming Thompson submachine guns neatly lined up, along with 5 or 6 old-fashioned Remington military shotguns scrounged from the black market, brass bullets reflecting the light. Fifth roared at the top of his lungs, the veins on his forehead bulging. Distribute the hardware to everyone. Over 20 long guns. I want to see if his scalpel can cut through bullets. Tonight, I'm going to tear 22 Lake Street apart and pull that black market doctor's guts out to hang them on a street light for 3 days. Over 20 vicious outlaws swarmed forward, the clicking sound of bolts being pulled echoing in unison. New York, Hell's Kitchen. Click. A very faint sound of metal snapping. Jessica Jones stared intently at the bloody piece of pork in the stainless steel tray. The steel curved suturing needle at the tip of the needle holder in her hand had snapped in 2 again. This was already the 5th needle to break tonight. William took off his blood-stained white coat, threw it into the medical waste bin, and walked to the sink to squeeze out a large glob of iota 4 hand sanitizer. Subcutaneous fat suturing needs to be tightened, but not so much that you're strangling it. Jessica irritably ran a hand through her messy short hair, the red veins in her eyes more prominent than yesterday. These damn needles are definitely defective. William turned on the faucet, cold water rinsing between his fingers. Stark Industries Medical Department exclusive high-carbon steel suturing needles. They cost $45 each. I'll check on your progress at 8 tomorrow morning. If you haven't finished sewing this meat or if you break another needle, I'll dock you $100. The curse words at the tip of Jessica's tongue were forced back down. She glared at the pork, replaced the needle, took a deep breath, and forcibly suppressed the strength in her fingertips that was enough to crush bricks. William dried his hands and ignored Jessica, walking to the pharmaceutical warehouse door and pressing down the handle. A deep blue vortex spun silently. He took a step through. A slight sensation of weightlessness swept through his semicircular canals. The sour smell of beer from Hell's Kitchen vanished, replaced by the lingering cold and dampness of Gotham City. The underground clinic was shrouded in darkness. Only the Stark Industries portable hyperbaric oxygen chamber emitted a faint blue glow in the dark, its pressure relief valve making a very slight hissing sound as it maintained the air pressure balance inside. William walked up to the chamber. Data pulsed steadily on the holographic projection panel, blood oxygen saturation 98%, heart rate 75, respiratory rate 18 breaths per minute. Perfect data. Behind the explosion-proof glass, Maggie had woken up. The cyanosis on the little girl's face had completely faded, replaced by a hint of pink on her cheeks as she looked at William standing outside. Maggie struggled to raise her hand, her lips moving silently behind the thick glass. Her lip movements were clear. Thank you." William's eyes remained emotionless as he took the medical chart and quickly made a notation. Then, he raised his right hand, tapped the glass, and pointed to the red forced sleep indicator light inside the chamber. An emotionless command. Maggie obediently closed her eyes, and the trace sedative in the medicine soon lulled her back into a deep sleep. Clang! A violent impact suddenly came from the bottom of the rolling shutter door. Then, the door was forced open from the outside, leaving a half-meter gap, and a black figure rolled in across the muddy concrete floor. Selina. She was soaked to the bone, her black form-fitting leather suit clinging to her body. Rain dripped from her hair, forming puddles on the floor. She gasped for air, her chest heaving violently, and her left leg twitched slightly from prolonged high-intensity running and the after-effects of a nerve block. "They're here." Selina's voice was raspy and hurried, laced with panic. She pushed herself up with one hand and rushed to William. Selina spoke rapidly. "The Rat Gang. That lunatic fifth has brought out all his hidden firearms. Over 20 people. All armed with Thompson submachine guns and Remington shotguns. They've split into 3 groups and blocked both ends of Lake Street. They'll have this place surrounded in 5 minutes at most." Selina drew a short dagger hidden in her leather boot, the blade reflecting the dim wall light. Selina stared intently at William, her gaze resolute. "There's no back door to this underground room. If we get trapped here, it's a dead end. I'll climb out through the ventilation duct. I know the rooftops of the East District. I can lure them toward the docks. You take Maggie and leave during the chaos. Go to the Upper East Side or anywhere else." After speaking, she turned to climb toward the vent in the corner. Smack! A dry towel smelling of disinfectant was accurately thrown onto Selina's face. Selina was stunned and instinctively pulled the towel off. William's voice was flat. "Dry your face, then go mop up the water on the floor." Selina froze, staring at William with wide eyes. "Don't you understand?" Selina lowered her voice. "There are over 20 automatic firearms. They could turn this crappy rolling shutter door into a sieve in a single volley. No matter how well you fight, can you move faster than a bullet? Boss, listen to me. You can't die. Take Maggie and go first, I'll hold them off." William didn't answer. He opened a drawer in the triage desk, pulled out a pair of black Kevlar cut-resistant gloves, and put them on his left hand. The dark silver storage ring at the base of his right index finger flashed slightly. 3 oddly shaped scalpels appeared out of thin air in his palm. These weren't ordinary medical instruments, but high-carbon titanium alloy blades used by the Osborne Group laboratory to cut through the bones of mutated creatures. The blades were dark gray and non-reflective, yet exceptionally sharp. William casually tucked the blades into his trench coat pocket. He walked behind the door and picked up the solid black long-handled umbrella. William turned to look at Selina, his gaze unquestionable. "I am the boss. My rule is, if rats enter my territory, they die." Selina opened her mouth, but the oppressive aura choked her. William walked to the door and placed his palm against the cold metal shutter. Lock the rolling door. No matter what you hear outside, don't look out and don't make a sound. If you disturb Maggie's sleep, I'll dock your pay. Rattle. The rolling door was raised halfway. The sound of heavy rain and cold wind instantly flooded into the clinic. William ducked out. The door slammed down behind him, followed immediately by the sound of the internal bolt locking. Chapter 22, The Carnage Begins. Clang. The heavy rolling shutter door slammed onto the ground, its internal latch locking tight. William stood in the mud of 22 Lake Street. Rain lashed down frantically against his black trench coat. At both ends of the alley, over 20 dark figures blocked his path. Lightning tore across the night sky, illuminating the uniformed Thompson submachine guns in their hands, along with several rugged Remington military shotguns. It's him. That back alley doctor. Someone in the crowd howled. No negotiations. No nonsense. Gang wars in Gotham East District never bothered with opening remarks. Fire. Turn him into mincemeat. Fifth, the boss of the rat gang, stood at the rear of the crowd, wiping rain from his bald head and roaring maniacally. More than 20 barrels simultaneously spat out blinding, dark red tongues of flame. Da-da-da-da. A dense storm of brass bullets instantly tore through the curtain of rain. Red brick walls on both sides of the alley were pulverized into flying debris, and trash cans were shredded like paper, with scrap metal flying everywhere. Absolute fire suppression. Never mind a man, even an elephant standing there would have been torn into raw meat within a tenth of a second. But the bullets passed through nothing but air. 1.5 seconds before the firing started. William flicked his wrist. He yanked the optical camouflage medical blanket from his system space and pulled it over his head. The moment the silver-thin blanket touched the rain, the light underwent an incredibly eerie refraction. William's slender frame, along with his black trench coat, seemed to be erased by an invisible eraser. He took a half step back, his back pressing against the cold brick wall. He blended perfectly into the night. Bullets grazed the tip of his nose, and the scorching airflow ruffled the stray hairs on his forehead. The first round of the volley ended. The gunfire stopped abruptly. Only the sound of shell casings hissing in the puddles remained, emitting white smoke. Where is he? Fifth pushed aside the lackey in front of him and strode into the alley mouth. The alley was empty. Aside from the trash cans riddled with holes and the bricks scattered across the ground, there wasn't even a drop of blood. What the hell, boss? That kid vanished into thin air. A lackey holding a gun said, his teeth chattering. Search. He couldn't have gone far. Even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground, find him. Fifth's eye twitched violently, making the scar running through his rat totem look even more hideous. The thugs held their guns and advanced into the depths of the alley in a fan formation. Their combat boots splashed through the puddles. The carnage began silently. William hugged the base of the wall, moving like a ghost in the rainy night. His breathing was suppressed to an extreme low, his master-level combat instincts kept his muscles in a state of absolute relaxation, yet ready to explode with terrifying power at any moment. On his left hand, an ultra-thin black Kevlar cut-resistant glove. In his right hand, an Osborne Group high-carbon titanium alloy blade. A thug at the back of the line was nervously looking around with his gun at the ready. He swallowed hard, just about to turn and speak to a companion. In the darkness, a hand wearing a black glove reached out from nowhere, firmly covering his mouth and nose. The thug's eyes widened suddenly, and he instinctively tried to pull the trigger. Too late. The dark gray titanium alloy blade cut in at an incredibly tricky angle just below his earlobe. The carotid sinus. This area is rich in nerve endings. The moment the blade sliced through the blood vessel, his blood pressure plummeted, and his brain instantly fell into a state of deep ischemia and hypoxia. No scream. No struggle. The thug's body went limp as if his bones had been removed. William caught him by the armpits and silently lowered the twitching body into the standing water. Blood gushed out, only to be washed away instantly by the torrential rain. The first one. William stepped over the corpse, his footsteps as light as a cat's, as he locked onto two targets on the left. The first rule of surgery: avoid hard bone and find the most vulnerable tissue gaps. He lowered his body and slid close. A flash of blade light flickered in the rainy night. Squelch! The hamstring tendon of the thug on the left was instantly severed. Losing his support, the thug screamed and fell to one knee. Before he could react, the blade had already stabbed straight into the depression above his collarbone. Ruptured subclavian artery. A high-pressure jet of blood sprayed over 2 meters, drenching the companion next to him. He's here. Fire! The companion, covered in blood, completely broke down and pulled the trigger frantically with his eyes closed. Da-da-da! The Thompson submachine gun fired wildly. But the moment William severed the artery, he used the momentum to roll aside and vanish into the shadows on the other side. The bullets didn't hit William, but instead mowed down several other rat gang members opposite him. Cease fire! You idiot! You're hitting our own men! The alley descended into total chaos. Fear of the unknown was more terrifying than death. They couldn't see their enemy, they could only see their companions falling in various grotesque positions. Some had their wrists slashed, others had their necks cut open. Every fall was accompanied by an incredibly precise, fatal wound. This wasn't a gang war at all. This was a one-sided slaughter. A live dissection carried out in the pouring rain. In just 3 short minutes. Half of the 20-plus members of the rat gang had already fallen. The remaining 10 or so were completely broken. They began firing blindly into the rain, even shoving each other as they tried to flee this cursed alley. Everyone stay the hell calm! Fifth roared. He used his gun stock to knock down a lackey trying to run, his eyes staring intently at the rain ahead. He was a hardened character who lived his life on the edge of a blade. Fear didn't crush him, instead, it stimulated a beast-like intuition. The rain. The downpour was too heavy. Fifth narrowed his eyes. He noticed that less than 5 meters away in mid-air, the trajectory of the falling rain showed a tiny anomaly. Water droplets hit an invisible curved surface and slid off strangely. In the momentary flash of lightning, an incredibly blurred, human-shaped water outline was revealed. A physical flaw of the cloaking device. Got you, you piece of trash! Fifth's eyes nearly split from rage. He suddenly raised the Remington shotgun, its wide barrel locking onto that water outline. The distance was too close. The spread of the shotgun was massive. Once he fired, countless steel pellets would turn that invisible monster into a honeycomb. His finger pulled the trigger. Under the cloaking blanket, William's pupils constricted. He couldn't dodge it. The distance was too short, and the shotgun's spread had already blocked all routes of evasion. But William had no intention of dodging. At the base of his right index finger, the dark silver storage ring suddenly flashed with a faint light. Bang! The Remington shotgun erupted with a deafening roar. A huge fan of fire spat from the muzzle. In the same 10,000th of a second the firelight appeared. Clang! A heavy, ear-piercing sound of metal hitting the ground exploded in the alley. A massive object appeared out of thin air between William and Fifth without any warning. It was a 300-pound stainless steel multifunctional surgical bed equipped with a complex hydraulic lifting system. Clang 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 clang. The dense shotgun pellets slammed into the thick metal base and stainless steel surface of the surgical bed like a violent storm, erupting in a large burst of dazzling sparks. The hard steel pellets were all deflected, leaving dense clusters of impact craters on the brick walls. The surgical bed didn't budge an inch. At that moment, Fifth's brain completely short-circuited. His eyeballs almost bulged out of their sockets. A surgical bed? Where did it come from? Did it fall from the sky? Or had this thing been hidden in the alley all along? This completely exceeded the cognitive limits of a Gotham gang boss. Chapter 23, The Fall of the Rat Gang. Clang, 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 clang. The dense hail of steel buckshot was like a violent storm, crashing frantically against the surface of the stainless steel surgical table. Blinding sparks erupted in the rainy night, illuminating the distorted, utterly horrified face of the Rat Gang leader, Fifth. The 300-pound solid metal base absorbed the full kinetic energy of the Remington at close range, remaining completely motionless. Fifth's pupils shrank to pinpricks. His Adam's apple bobbed in the center of his throat, but he couldn't make a sound. A surgical table? Appearing out of thin air? In the half-second while his brain was completely stalled, the air beside the surgical table suddenly distorted in an eerie fashion. The thin silver blanket was whipped aside. William lunged out like a long dormant black panther, staying close to the muddy asphalt. The distance between the two was less than 2 meters. Driven by a gangster's instinct, Fifth tried to pull the pump-action friend to eject the shell and chamber another round. But a hand wearing a black Kevlar cut-resistant glove gripped the Remington's scalding barrel like a hydraulic clamp. Rain hit the hot barrel with a sizzle, and white smoke rose instantly. Fifth yanked back with all his might. It didn't budge. This sickly-looking Asian doctor's arm seemed to have steel rebar buried inside it. Before Fifth could let go, a dark gray afterimage slashed through the rainy night without warning. The high-carbon titanium alloy blade from Osborne Corp sliced into Fifth's right wrist. There was no resistance from bone. The blade glided with absolute precision into the carpal tunnel, severing the median nerve and flicking upward. All 9 flexor tendons were severed in one clean sweep. Splat! Blood splattered, mixing with the rain. Fifth didn't even feel the pain yet. His right hand became like a piece of rotted wood that had suddenly snapped off, instantly losing all grip. The heavy Remington shotgun fell into a puddle with a clatter. Immediately after, the blade traced a tiny arc in midair and backhanded into his left wrist. The same anatomical position. The same clean, decisive nerve severance. 2 seconds. 2 cuts. The Rat Gang leader's hands were completely ruined. The delayed agony finally surged along the nerve endings and into his cerebral cortex. Fifth's knees buckled, and he fell heavily into the mud. Holding up his 2 wrists, which were spraying blood frantically, he let out a shrill, pig-slaughtering scream. William let go of the barrel and stood up, looking down at him. Rain flowed down his black trench coat, and there wasn't a single ripple of emotion in his eyes, which were framed by heavy dark circles. The remaining Rat Gang thugs in the alley watched their leader get crippled in an instant, then looked at the surgical table blocking the road. Their psychological defenses completely collapsed. "Monster, he's a monster!" someone screamed, and the rest dropped their Thompson submachine guns, scrambling and crawling out of Lake Street to disappear into the East End night. William didn't give chase. Small fry couldn't cause much trouble. He lowered his hand, letting the torrential rain wash the blood off the titanium alloy blade. You can't kill me." Fifth knelt on the ground, the blood from his severed wrists staining the puddles beneath him red. He looked up, his face covered in mud and cold sweat from extreme terror. At the threshold of life and death, he roared frantically as if grasping for a final lifeline. "I work for the Falcone family. The underground organ black market in the East End. The middleman there is a Falcone family executive." Fifth shrieked, attempting to use Gotham City's most massive mafia empire to crush the underground doctor before him. "If you dare touch me, Lord Falcone will skin you alive. This shitty clinic of yours, and that woman inside, will all be stuffed into cement barrels and dumped into Gotham Bay." William didn't even blink. The titanium alloy blade flipped nimbly between his slender fingertips. Falcone. William chewed on the name. The Roman, the underground emperor of Gotham's old era. Fifth thought William was afraid, because in Gotham, no one wasn't afraid of Falcone. A hideous grin, uglier than a crying face, squeezed onto his fleshy features. "Yes. Falcone. Let me go, and I'll act like tonight never happened. On my operating table. William interrupted him. His voice wasn't loud, yet it pierced through the roar of the rain with extreme clarity. Whether you're Mafia or the mayor of Gotham City, William took a step forward, his leather shoe crushing the reflection in the puddle, you're all just carbon-based organisms made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. One cut to the carotid artery, and even Falcone's blood can only spray 2 meters high. The smile on Fifth's face froze. In those black pupils, he saw something colder than death. William's left hand grabbed Fifth's leather jacket collar, hoisting the nearly 2-meter-tall brute up by force. You kidnap homeless people and harvest their organs for the black market. This severely violates my medical ethics. William's voice was as cold as a morgue freezer. Death is too cheap for you. I want you to live in fear and conscious agony for the rest of your life. Consider it a bit of interest paid for the innocent people you disassembled into parts. Before his voice finished echoing, the scalpel in William's right hand lunged out. Target, the back of the neck. The tip of the blade pierced with surgical precision between the third cervical vertebra, C3, and the fourth cervical vertebra, C4. This was the human body's forbidden zone for life. William's wrist turned slightly. The blade avoided the respiratory center of the medulla oblongata but cruelly and accurately severed the spinal motor nerve bundles below. Click. A very faint sound of cartilage being sliced. Fifth's eyes instantly bulged to their limit, his eyeballs becoming bloodshot in a heartbeat. His mouth hung wide open, but he could not make a sound. Because from the neck down, he had completely lost control of his body. His sphincters relaxed instantly. And pungent urine mixed with the rainwater flowing down. William let go. Fifth collapsed into the puddle like a pile of rotted mud with its bones removed. He could still breathe on his own. His eyeballs could still roll frantically. His brain was perfectly conscious, feeling the cold touch of the rain hitting his face. But he couldn't even move a pinky finger. High-level quadriplegia. From now on, this wicked rat gang leader would be imprisoned for life within his own flesh, unable even to commit suicide. William wiped the blood off the titanium alloy blade onto Fifth's clothes. With a thought, the blade was retracted into his storage ring. He turned around, his gaze scanning the dark alleyways of Lake Street. Over a dozen bodies of rat gang members lay scattered in the mud. The scent of blood was too strong for even the storm to wash away. If left untreated, GCPD, Gotham City Police Department, cruisers would have this place cordoned off by tomorrow morning. William walked to the nearest corpse. He removed the Kevlar glove from his left hand. The dark silver ring at the base of his index finger touched the corpse's cold forehead. Whoosh! The corpse on the ground vanished into thin air. The corner of William's mouth curled into a satisfied arc. 100 cubic meter subspace. Stowing a dozen corpses wouldn't even fill a corner. He walked toward the next corpse. Falcone family? Organ black market? William stuffed the corpses into the ring one by one. He had been worrying about where to get a large quantity of illicit medical equipment. Since the Falcone family executive was involved in organ smuggling, they must have a perfectly established underground medical supply chain. This was a high-quality supplier delivered right to his door. Chapter 24, Dockside Storm. The torrential rain in Gotham City continued to rage. In the alley at 22 Lake Street, the heavy scent of blood was washed away by the rain, pouring madly down the sewer grates. William stood in the mud. Confirming there were no survivors left from the rat gang, he raised his right hand. At the base of his index finger, the patternless, dark silver ring shimmered with a faint, eerie light under the flash of lightning. His fingertip touched a corpse with a severed carotid artery. Swish! There was no sound, no visual effects. The 200-pound body of the burly man vanished into thin air. William stepped forward with a blank expression. His leather shoes splashed through puddles as his fingertips tapped repeatedly. The second body. The fifth. The 12th. Along with the scattered Thompson submachine guns, Remington shotguns, and severed limbs shattered by shotgun blasts, everything was swept precisely into that 100 cubic meter subspace. For a black market surgeon, these were not unlucky corpses. They were excellent anatomical teaching aids, and even better, hard currency to use for negotiating or blackmailing the Falcone family in the future. The alley was completely empty. Except for the faint red water stains diluted by the rain, no one knew that a one-sided vivisection had just taken place here. William turned around, pulled up the rolling shutter, and slipped into the clinic. Inside the hyperbaric oxygen chamber, Maggie was sleeping soundly. Selina was leaning against the glass cover, breathing steadily. William did not make a sound, walking straight to the iron door at the back of the clinic marked Medical Supply Warehouse. He pressed down the handle, and a deep blue vortex rotated silently. He stepped through. A sense of weightlessness instantly swept over his semicircular canals. The uniquely cold and damp air of Gotham City was replaced by the sour stench of Hell's Kitchen, a mix of stale sour beer and rotting garbage. Bang! Just as William exited the passage, a piece of rotten pork, stitched up densely like an ugly centipede, was slammed heavily onto a stainless steel tray. Jessica Jones was slumped in the swivel chair behind the triage desk. She had dark circles under her eyes even heavier than William's, and her hair was as messy as a bird's nest. On the tiles by her feet lay 7 or 8 high-carbon steel surgical needles that had been snapped in half. "Boss." Jessica gritted her teeth, her voice as raspy as if she had swallowed sandpaper. "I'm done stitching. If you make me touch this thing again, I'll shove this piece of meat into your mouth." William took off his trench coat and casually put on a white lab coat. He put on sterile gloves, walked over to the tray, and picked up the tweezers to poke at the pork. The stitches were crooked and hideous. But when the tweezers probed the incision, the underlying muscle tissue and fat layers had indeed been pulled together in layers, leaving no dead space. At the edge of his retina, deep blue characters flickered. Long-term teaching quest, the healer's legacy. Current progress, 15%. A subtle curve appeared at the corner of William's mouth. This humanoid tyrannosaur, despite her explosive temper, was truly a good candidate for surgery. Once her strength control became precise to the millimeter, the needle holder in her hand would be steadier than any precision instrument. Barely passing. William dropped the tweezers and took off his gloves. However, dead pork has no blood pressure and no muscle spasms, it's only good for practicing your touch. Jessica froze, a sense of foreboding creeping into her heart. "What do you mean?" "I've prepared more realistic teaching materials for you." As soon as he finished speaking, William waved his right hand forward casually. The dark silver ring flashed with a faint light. Bang! Bang! 2 heavy bodies slammed onto the cold concrete floor out of thin air. Water splashed everywhere. The cold rain of Gotham City, mixed with the pungent smell of gunpowder and the thick scent of blood, instantly rushed into Jessica's nasal cavity. Jessica sprang up from her chair. Her superhuman strength erupted instantly, and the heavy triage desk was lifted half a foot off the ground by her thigh, emitting a harsh metallic screech. She stared fixedly at the 2 burly men on the ground, their faces deathly pale and dark red blood seeping from their necks, her pupils trembling violently. You fucking doing magic?" Jessica pointed at the corpses on the ground, her voice rising an octave, and she retreated 2 steps until she was pressed against the medicine cabinet. "Or did you go out and kill people in the middle of the night? These are still fucking warm." William pulled over a swivel chair and sat down, picked up the cold coffee on the table, and took a sip, his eyes as calm as if he were looking at 2 blocks of wood. "Unlucky victims of an Eastern European gang shootout. I picked them up." William casually told a lie and pointed to one of the corpses. "Go, put on your gloves. Open his chest cavity. Within 1 minute. Find the subclavian artery and complete the ligation." Jessica swallowed hard, staring at the man with dark circles under his eyes. She suddenly felt that her $5,000 monthly salary was essentially life-threatening. At the same time, on the edge of Hell's Kitchen in New York, at Container Terminal 47, owned by Kingpin, the sea fog in the early morning was extremely thick, with visibility less than 10 meters. The air was so heavy it felt like it could be wrung out. At the edge of the dock, dozens of gangsters in black trench coats were nervously unloading cargo. The crane emitted a dull roar, hoisting huge wooden crates down from the cargo ship one by one. When the wooden crates landed, several leaders stepped forward to pry open the lids. Half were high-purity drugs from Mexico, wrapped in layers of waterproof foil. The other half were green ammunition crates stamped with the Stark logo. Heavy weaponry leaked secretly from Stark Industries. High-explosive grenades, armor-piercing rounds, and even several portable man-portable missile launchers. "Move it. We have to get the cargo into the warehouse before dawn," the bald leader hissed. At the highest point of the dock, in the shadow of a 100-meter-tall gantry crane, Frank Castle was like a god of death blending into the darkness. He lay on the cold steel beam, his eyes as cold as ice. Beneath his large tactical gloves, his hands assembled a disassembled Remington M24 heavy sniper rifle with terrifying proficiency. Click! A very faint sound of metal engaging. A bullet was chambered. Frank's breathing rate dropped to 4 times per minute. The crosshairs pierced through the sea fog, locking firmly onto the green crate below filled with high-explosive ammunition. Just one armor-piercing incendiary round. The entire dock would turn into a sea of fire. The drugs, the weapons, along with the dozens of scum below, would all be blown into shredded meat. Sin does not need judgment, it only needs eradication. Frank rested his index finger on the trigger and slowly applied pressure. Meanwhile, on the other side of the dock, in the gap between mountains of stacked containers, Matt Murdock wore a dark red cowl, gripping the alloy billy clubs in his hands tightly. Although his eyes were covered, his super hearing constructed a 3D radar map in his mind that was clearer than the naked eye. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks. The flapping of seagulls' wings. The heartbeats, footsteps, and rustling of clothing of the dozens of gangsters below. Matt's brow was tightly furrowed. His goal for the night was to sneak in silently, subdue a few leaders, obtain the ledger of Kingpin's arms smuggling, and hand it over to the police. Procedural justice. This was his bottom line as a lawyer. Suddenly, Matt's ears twitched ever so slightly. He filtered out the noisy clamor below and caught that extremely faint yet lethal sound of metal friction from the top of the crane 100 meters away. A bullet chambering. Accompanying it was an extremely steady, cold, and emotionless heartbeat. That lunatic Matt gritted his teeth. He instantly deduced who the person hiding in the dark was. The Punisher, who had recently been causing a bloodbath in Hell's Kitchen and never left any survivors. If he let that guy fire, this place would become a slaughterhouse. The explosion might even reach the civilian areas on the outskirts of the dock. He must not let him fire. Chapter 25, Deadly Trap. Matt exerted force in his legs, leaping wildly between the shipping containers like a dark red bat. At the top of the crane, Frank's crosshairs had locked onto his target. The center of the crosshairs was aimed at the fuse of the high-explosive grenade crate. His index finger tightened. Whoosh! An extremely sharp whistling sound suddenly came from the right. Frank's tactical instincts, honed by years of living on the edge of life and death, screamed a warning. He didn't turn his head. He jerked his neck to the left. Clang! A dark red alloy baton, carrying terrifying kinetic energy, smashed heavily against the barrel of his M24 sniper rifle. Sparks flew everywhere. The barrel was knocked violently off course. Bang! The massive gunshot tore through the sea mist, and the large caliber bullet grazed the shipping container below, blowing out the tire of a forklift. The gangsters unloading cargo below were thrown into instant chaos. Enemy attack! Take cover, the bald leader roared, and dozens of automatic rifles were raised in an instant. On the crane. Frank shoved the useless sniper rifle aside and spun around violently. By the faint moonlight, he made out the man crouching on the steel beam, wearing a dark red hood. Daredevil. Frank's voice was hoarse, carrying a heavy scent of gunpowder. He backhanded a modified M1911 pistol from the tactical holster on his thigh, pointing the muzzle directly at Matt. "You've crossed the line, Frank." Matt stood up, catching the rebounding alloy baton with his right hand. "There are high explosive munitions down there. That shot of yours would blow half the dock sky high, and civilians on the perimeter would die." "Civilians? I only see a bunch of damn scum." Frank sneered, his thumb flicking off the safety. "I'm not interested in playing your game of sending people to jail only to watch them pay bail and walk free. Get lost. As long as I'm here, you won't kill anyone." Matt gripped his baton tightly, lowering his center of gravity. "Then I'll slaughter you along with them." Without another word, Frank raised his hand and fired 3 shots. Bang! 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 The triangular trajectory sealed off all of Matt's escape routes. But Matt's super senses had already predicted the trajectory the moment Frank's muscles tensed. He twisted his body like a phantom, his alloy baton carving several afterimages in the air. Clang! 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 The 3 bullets were deflected with precision, grazing Matt's shoulder and flying into the thick fog. Frank frowned slightly, but his movements didn't pause for a second. He knew well that against an agile opponent like this, creating distance was suicide. He lunged forward, using the momentum of the sprint, his right leg sweeping toward Matt's ribs like a battle axe. A lethal move from Krav Maga. Matt didn't block it head-on. He could hear the terrifying power contained in that kick. He leaned back, bracing one hand on the beam, and swung his right foot upward, aiming straight for Frank's chin. Frank pressed his left arm down, forcefully blocking the kick. The massive impact forced them both to step back half a pace. 100 meters in the air, on a narrow steel beam. A single mistake meant death. Neither paused, crashing into each other again. Frank's combat style was filled with the ruthlessness and lethality of a soldier, every strike aimed at the throat, joints, or eyes. He didn't need flashy techniques, he only needed to neutralize the enemy as quickly as possible. Matt's combat style, however, was filled with artistic precision. The sticky strikes of Wing Chun, the rapid-fire combos of Filipino Kali. With his eyes closed, relying only on his hearing and the flow of air, he could perfectly track every one of Frank's attacks. Bang! Frank punched Matt in the chest. Matt grunted, backhanding a strike with his baton into Frank's shoulder. The two passed each other. "You can't save that scum." Frank wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, his eyes growing increasingly crazed. "The tumors of this city must be burned away with the fire of sin. This isn't justice. You're just venting your personal vendetta." Matt panted, his fingers gripping the baton turning white from the effort. "Justice." Frank laughed, his laughter filled with endless sorrow and coldness. "When my family was gunned down, where was your justice?" Before the words had even faded, Frank yanked a high-explosive grenade from his belt and pulled the pin with his teeth. Without hesitation, he threw it directly at the shipping container below, which was packed with munitions. "Madman!" Matt's eyes widened in fury. He didn't hesitate to leap from the 100-meter-high crane, like a moth to a flame, diving straight for the falling grenade. Frank stood on the beam, watching the scene coldly as he pulled out a new magazine and slammed it into the chamber. Click! The faint sound of the mechanical fuse popping open was like a thunderclap in Matt's ears. 30 meters from the sea surface. 20 meters. 15 meters. Matt exerted force in his core, forcibly twisting his body in mid-air. His arm muscles bulged, and the alloy baton that had accompanied him through countless blood-soaked nights flew from his hand. A shrill whistling sound tore through the sea mist. Clang! An extremely precise metallic impact. The alloy baton smashed heavily into the tail of the high-explosive grenade just 10 meters above the sea surface. Boom! A violent, orange-red fireball expanded thunderously in mid-air. A terrifying shockwave, carrying tons of seawater, poured down like a torrential rain. The gangsters unloading cargo below were bowled over by the shockwave like bowling pins, and the shipping containers groaned with the teeth-gritting sound of twisting metal. It didn't reach the civilian area. The fuse had been cut short. At the top of the crane, Frank looked down at the firelight coldly. A look of utter contempt curled his lips. Soft-hearted. He spat, and without hesitation, hooked his tactical gloves onto the steel cable. With a push of his legs, he slid rapidly down the cable like a giant black bat. The harsh sound of friction stretched out into the night. Landing, he transitioned into a textbook tactical roll, shedding his momentum. Frank drew the M1911 from his thigh, holding the muzzle level, like a cold, unfeeling killing machine. He headed straight for Core Warehouse 47 deep in the docks. His goal was clear: blow the heavy munitions and high-purity drugs leaked from Stark Industries, along with the scum guarding them, into ashes. Matt leaped gracefully from the top of the container, catching the rebounding baton. He followed close behind. He had to find the ledger of Kingpin's smuggling operation before Frank turned this place into a slaughterhouse. The two of them, one after the other, kicked open the ajar corrugated metal door and charged into the dim Warehouse 47. The interior of the warehouse was massive, stacked with wooden crates reaching the ceiling, the air thick with the mixed scent of machine oil, desiccant, and cheap tobacco. Silence. Too quiet. Matt's footsteps suddenly halted, his dark red hood tilting slightly. His ears twitched almost imperceptibly. His super hearing instantly pierced through the chaotic ambient noise, filtering out the sound of the wind, the waves, and the distant wail of sirens. He caught the sound of heartbeats. Dozens of heartbeats. Hiding high up behind the shipping containers. But what made the hairs on the back of Matt's neck stand up wasn't the numbers. It was the heartbeat directly in front, behind a pile of munitions crates. Extremely slow. Cold. There wasn't a shred of panic at the surprise attack. Instead, it radiated a thick, nauseating, pure lust for slaughter. Like a venomous snake flicking its tongue. Frank, retreat! Matt roared, his muscles instantly tensing to their limit. It's a trap. Too late. Pop. 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 The screeching sound of an electrical overload exploded across the top of the vast warehouse. Dozens of industrial-grade, high-power searchlights turned on simultaneously without warning. This wasn't ordinary lighting at all. This was tactical-grade blinding light. Ah! Matt let out a stifled scream. Although the bright light couldn't sting his already blind eyes, the piercing, high-frequency electrical hum produced when those dozens of high-power searchlights activated instantly shattered his super hearing. His brain felt as if it were being pierced by tens of thousands of red-hot needles at once. His 3D radar map collapsed instantly, dissolving into a chaotic static. Matt fell to his knees in agony, clutching his ears tightly, his nails nearly digging into his scalp. Sensory overload. This was his most fatal weakness. Chapter 26, Cruel Battle. Before the voice had even faded, dozens of industrial-grade high-power searchlights around the warehouse suddenly switched on. Intense light poured down, illuminating the vast Warehouse 47 with such clarity that every detail was exposed. Streams of photons ruthlessly pierced through the shadows, dispelling all cover. Accompanying the intense light was the high-frequency electrical hum of the searchlight ballasts. To an ordinary person, this frequency of sound wave would merely be a harsh noise, but falling into Matt's superhuman auditory system, it was nothing short of an acoustic catastrophe. The human auditory system centers on the hair cells within the cochlea. These tiny cells are responsible for converting mechanical sound waves into bioelectrical signals, which are then transmitted to the auditory cortex of the brain. Matt's hair cells, mutated by radioactive waste, were thousands of times more sensitive than an ordinary person's. The high-frequency hum felt like tangible blades, ruthlessly slicing through his auditory nerves. Bioelectrical signals congested the synaptic gaps, and the release of neurotransmitters spiraled out of control. The cerebral cortex received a massive influx of redundant information, and his computational ability completely collapsed. The perfectly constructed 3D echolocation radar map in his mind instantly dissolved into a chaotic sky of static noise. Matt's knees slammed heavily onto the rough concrete floor, and he clutched his ears tightly with both hands. His fingernails dug into his scalp, and blood trickled down his temples. The pain brought on by sensory overload far exceeded physical trauma. It was torture acting directly upon the central nervous system. Steady footsteps approached from behind the shipping containers. Each step landed with a specific rhythm, demonstrating the newcomer's control over the situation. Bullseye wore his signature black combat suit, the white bullseye pattern on his forehead gleaming with a chilling luster under the intense light. He toyed with 3 specially made steel throwing darts in his hands. As his knuckles flickered, the metal emitted a crisp ringing sound. All around, 50 fully armed gangsters poured out from the shadows. The safeties of their HK-416 assault rifles clicked off in succession, and the beams from their red dot sights wove into an airtight web of death, locking onto the 2 people in the center of the warehouse. Boss Kingpin specifically instructed me to say hello to the 2 big stars of Hell's Kitchen. Bullseye grinned, revealing stark white teeth, his smile permeated with an intense desire for bloodshed. This shipment of military hardware, worth $50 million, will serve as your burial goods. The standard is high enough. Empty talk had never been Frank's style. Words were the cheapest commodity on the battlefield, only bullets could provide the most honest answer. His cerebellum and spinal reflex arc took complete control of his body. He raised his arm, the front sight of his M1911 pistol framing Bullseye's face, and his index finger pulled the trigger in rapid succession. Bang! 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 A 3-round burst. The trajectory formed a triangular pattern, sealing off Bullseye's evasion routes to the left and right. The very second he fired, Frank engaged his core muscles and performed a tactical roll behind a pile of military wooden crates to his right. Bullseye's reaction speed was nothing short of superhuman. His spine emitted a series of cracks as his upper body folded backward into an exaggerated angle, performing a limbo-like arch. The bullets grazed the tip of his nose, kicking up a wave of scorching air. At the very limit of his backward arch, Bullseye snapped his right wrist, and 3 steel throwing darts flew from his hand. Ordinary dart throwing relies on the swing of the arm and the flick of the wrist. Bullseye's technique was completely different. His skeletal structure, shaped by years of deformed training, allowed for a range of motion in his shoulder blades that far exceeded an ordinary person's. Before throwing, his latissimus dorsi muscles contracted, channeling power along his spine to his shoulders, then releasing it through his triceps. This power generation mechanism could boost the initial velocity of the darts to over 80 meters per second. It is worth noting that the tails of the steel darts were engraved with extremely tiny spiral grooves. The moment they left his hand, air flowing through the grooves created a powerful Magnus effect. The imbalance between the high-pressure and low-pressure zones gave the darts an arc trajectory that defied Newton's first law. The darts curved around the edge of the wooden crates, heading straight for Frank's carotid artery and heart. During his roll, Frank's tactical boot kicked an abandoned oil drum on the ground. The empty metal barrel flew into the air, meeting 2 of the darts. A harsh sound of metal friction rang out, and sparks flew everywhere. The 3rd dart grazed Frank's ribs, slicing through the Kevlar armor of his tactical vest and leaving a shallow bloodstain. The sound of gunfire became the signal for all-out engagement. 50 assault rifles roared in unison, brass casings hitting the ground like raindrops. Bullets poured into the military wooden crates, sending wood splinters flying. Frank displayed the ultimate proficiency of human special operations. He did not return fire blindly, but instead relied on the complex terrain of the shipping containers to execute textbook CQB maneuvers. Every time he exposed half his body from behind cover, the muzzle of his M1911 would spit fire. He specifically targeted the seams of the gangsters' body armor, their faces, and their necks. Within 3 seconds, 4 machine gunners fell backward. Matt suppressed the chaos in his central nervous system. He knew that if he fell, Frank would have no chance of resisting a firepower grid of this scale alone. He bit the tip of his tongue, using the taste of blood and the pain to forcibly awaken some of his senses. His alloy billy club spun rapidly in his hands, dancing into an impenetrable defensive barrier. Relying on muscle memory and the lingering sound of wind, the blind lawyer knocked down stray bullets aimed at Frank's blind spots. The crisp clashing of metal rang out continuously amidst the gunfire. Bullseye stood high above, looking down at the desperate struggle below. Conventional weapons had little effect on these two freaks, so he casually grabbed a handful of loose steel nails from the shelf beside him. He pinched the tails of the steel nails between his fingers and flicked his wrist. A dozen or so steel nails transformed into deadly hidden weapons, piercing the air. They were not aimed directly at Frank, but instead struck the surrounding steel walls and shipping container shells. After 2, or even 3, physical ricochets, the nails shot into the area behind Frank's cover from incredibly bizarre angles. Frank dodged to the side, but one steel nail grazed his cheek, taking a piece of flesh with it. He fired a shot backward, shattering the light fixture above his head, attempting to create localized darkness. However, there were too many searchlights. The white light remained blinding. Frank emptied his magazine, pressed the magazine release button with his thumb, and the empty magazine fell in freefall. His left hand pulled a new magazine from his tactical vest, slid it into the magazine well, and his index finger pressed the slide release lever. The entire process took less than 0.8 seconds, compressing the vacuum in his firepower to the extreme. He determined Bullseye's location and raised his gun to pre-aim. Bullseye did not engage Frank in a direct firefight. He was well versed in the way of the assassin, moving rapidly across the tops of the shipping containers like an agile black cat. With every movement, various odds and ends were thrown by him: broken glass, discarded gears, even empty shell casings all became deadly weapons in his hands. Matt's condition was extremely dire. The intense light caused the ambient temperature to rise, and the moisture in the air evaporated rapidly. His olfactory system was interfered with, making it impossible to accurately distinguish the enemy's positions. Every swing of his club consumed massive amounts of his stamina. The gangsters attempted to tighten the encirclement, with 2 burly men wielding Remington shotguns flanking from the sides. Frank caught the threat in his peripheral vision. He did not turn his gun. Instead, he drew the tactical knife from his thigh and threw it backhanded. The knife pierced the throat of the burly man on the left. At the same time, Frank slid across the ground, avoiding the shotgun blast from the burly man on the right. During the slide, he fired 2 shots from the M1911, shattering the opponent's kneecap. As the burly man fell to the ground, Frank took advantage of the momentum to seize the shotgun, pulled the pump-action forend with one hand, and blew apart the opponent's chest with a single shot. Matt's ability to locate targets by sound was impaired, but the muscle memory of his years of Filipino stick fighting remained. A gangster charged toward Matt with a bayonet. Matt sidestepped to avoid the blade, grabbed the opponent's wrist with his left hand, and slammed his alloy billy club into the opponent's elbow joint with his right. The sound of bone breaking was clearly audible. He seized the assault rifle, using it as a long stick, and smashed the butt of the rifle into another enemy's jawbone. The brutality of the battle continued to escalate, and the warehouse was filled with the thick scent of gunpowder and the stench of blood. Chapter 27, Matt, critically injured and near death. Bullseye stood at a high vantage point, a hint of irritation in his eyes. These two were more troublesome than he had anticipated. The $50 million arms crate was right beneath his feet. If he didn't end the fight quickly and draw the police or SHIELD, it would be a major problem. He reached into the custom holster at his lower back and pulled out 2 strangely shaped darts, their edges covered in barbs and coated with a ghostly green liquid. This was a neurotoxin extracted from the Amazon upas tree and genetically modified. Even a tiny amount entering the bloodstream could cause an adult African elephant to suffer cardiac arrest within 10 seconds. The battle reached a fever pitch. Bullseye searched for the perfect opportunity to strike. His snake-like eyes locked onto the two people below. The casualty count of the gangsters was rising sharply, and a gap had been forcibly torn into the 50-man perimeter. Frank's shotgun was out of ammunition. He discarded the empty weapon and drew his M1911 again. Just as he lowered his head, his line of sight blocked by cover. This was the perfect opening. Bullseye flicked his wrist. The poison dart flew from his hand. There was no sound of it breaking the air. The aerodynamic shape of these custom darts had been extremely optimized, reducing turbulence during flight to a minimum. The target was the back of Frank's unguarded brainstem. Once pierced, the vital center of the medulla oblongata would immediately cease to function. Anatomically speaking, the back of the brainstem was one of the most vulnerable areas of the human body, lacking the effective protection of a hard skull. As long as the poison dart penetrated the skin and muscle layers, it could directly sever the signal transmission of the central nervous system. Although Matt's hearing was impaired, his intuition for danger surpassed physical senses. He caught the extremely subtle sound of it cutting through the air. It was the air pressure change caused by the poison dart flying at high speed. He determined the trajectory. The target was Frank. Matt did not hesitate at all. The muscles in his legs bulged, and he launched himself into the air. He used his own flesh and blood to forcibly intercept the flight path of the poison dart. Pfft! The dull sound of a sharp blade piercing skin and flesh. The poison dart pierced Matt's right chest cavity without deviation, the barbs getting stuck firmly between the fourth and fifth ribs, the sharp tip piercing the visceral pleura, less than 2 centimeters from the right ventricle. The ghostly green toxin surged wildly into the bloodstream along the ruptured capillaries, the destructive power of the cardiac glycoside toxin fully revealed in this moment. The toxin molecules quickly bound to the sodium-potassium pumps on the myocardial cell membranes, blocking ion exchange, causing intracellular calcium ion concentrations to soar, abnormally increasing myocardial contractility, and subsequently triggering fatal arrhythmia. Matt fell heavily to the ground, his alloy baton slipping from his hand and rolling far across the concrete. His face turned pale at a speed visible to the naked eye, and his lips took on a terrifying cyanotic color. Breathing became extremely difficult, and every gasp was accompanied by a hissing sound of air leaking from his lungs. Tension pneumothorax complicated by neurotoxin infection. Frank heard the commotion and turned back. He saw Matt lying in a pool of blood, his pupils contracting to the size of pinpricks. Matt. Frank's voice was hoarse, thick with the scent of blood. He slid over to Matt's side and scooped him up with one hand. Matt coughed up a mouthful of black blood mixed with organ fragments, gripping Frank's tactical vest tightly. "Go, leave me." Frank's eyes became terrifying. It was the ultimate rage of someone who, after witnessing the tragic death of his family, was now seeing a comrade fall. He did not hesitate in the slightest, tearing the last high-explosive grenade from his waist with his left hand and pulling the pin with his teeth. He didn't throw it immediately, but counted silently in his heart. 3, 2, 1. The grenade left his hand, tracing a perfect parabola, and landed in the gap of the arms crate at Bullseye's feet. Bullseye's expression changed drastically. He didn't even have time to curse before turning and running. The thunderous explosion overturned half the warehouse, and a violent orange-red fireball rose into the air, consuming everything in its vicinity. The shockwave carried tons of steel fragments, radiating outward. The high temperature depleted the oxygen inside the warehouse, forming a temporary vacuum zone. Physical laws displayed their most primitive destructive power here. The armor-piercing rounds and high-explosive ammunition in the arms crate detonated in sympathy, creating a chain reaction. The shockwave traveled faster than the speed of sound, tearing through containers along its path like cardboard boxes. Using the cover provided by the explosion, Frank hoisted Matt onto his shoulder. He smashed through the warehouse's flimsy sheet metal wall and rushed into the endless torrential rain of Hell's Kitchen. The rain extinguished the sparks on their bodies but could not stop the rapid loss of Matt's body heat. Bullseye crawled out of the ruins. His signature combat suit was burnt to rags, and half his face was covered in blood and filth. He stared into the bottomless night outside the warehouse, his eyes filled with extreme malice. "Lock down all the blocks." Bullseye issued the order to his surviving men, his voice icy cold. "He's carrying a burden, he won't get far. I'm going to tear their heads off myself and hang them on the roof of the Kingpin building." Escape in the rainy night. Frank, carrying Matt, sprinted through the waterlogged alleyways. His tactical boots crushed puddles, splashing up murky mud and water. Matt's vital signs were dropping rapidly. The neurotoxin had invaded his cardiac pacemaker, causing ventricular tachycardia. His body convulsed uncontrollably, and his pupils began to dilate. Frank found a rain shelter and set Matt down. He tore open a medical kit and used a tourniquet to tighten around the wound on Matt's chest, trying to slow the spread of the toxin. But it was just a drop in the bucket. He had to find a doctor. He absolutely could not go to a regular hospital. Kingpin's informants were spread throughout the entire New York medical system. Going there would be walking straight into a trap. Frank quickly searched his memory for Hell's Kitchen's underground intelligence network. A rumor surfaced. There was a newly opened black clinic on Lake Street. The owner was an Asian man, his medical skills unfathomable, and he never asked about a patient's background, as long as they could pay. There was no other choice. Frank hoisted Matt back up and pushed forward at full speed toward the target location. The torrential rain in Hell's Kitchen seemed to have the magic to wash away all sins, but it could not wash away the rot in the bones of this city. Frank's breathing remained steady. Years of extreme physical training allowed him to sprint for several kilometers while carrying an adult male without showing fatigue, but Matt couldn't hold on. The toxin began to paralyze his respiratory muscles. The rise and fall of Matt's chest became smaller and smaller. Every breath required the strength of his entire body. "Hold on, Matt, whatever you do, don't sleep," Frank roared, his pace quickening once more. He passed through 3 dark alleys filled with trash, avoiding 2 search squads of Kingpin's men. Finally, the dilapidated rolling shutter door at 22 Lake Street appeared Indiana his field of vision. There was no sign above the door, only a dim wall lamp swaying in the wind and rain. Inside the underground clinic, Jessica Jones sat slumped in a swivel chair behind the triage desk, a few broken suture needles scattered at her feet, and in a stainless steel tray, the chest cavity of that Eastern European gangster's corpse was wide open. William was wearing a white coat and sterile gloves, holding a needle holder, demonstrating how to perform a vascular anastomosis. "Look closely, the angle of the needle entry must be perpendicular to the vessel wall, and the stitch spacing should be kept at 1 mm. You are using too much force, it's easy to tear the vascular intima." Jessica rolled her eyes, just about to complain. Bang! The clinic's rolling shutter door was kicked open by an irresistible force. The slide rail at the bottom of the door was severely deformed, emitting a teeth-grinding metallic screech. Frank, carrying the dying Matt, crashed into the clinic, bringing with him the cold chill of the rain and the strong scent of blood. He locked the broken rolling door behind him, his M1911 pointing directly at the 2 people behind the triage desk. "Save him!" Frank's voice was hoarse, his muzzle steady as a rock. "If you can't heal him, all of you will be buried with him." Jessica was annoyed by this sudden turn of events. She was already frustrated from suturing the corpse. She stood up, her explosive power far exceeding that of an ordinary person, allowing her to ignore the threat of the muzzle. She took a step forward, her left hand gripping the barrel of the M1911 like an iron pincer, and bent it with force using her right hand. The barrel, made of fine steel, felt like a plastic toy in her hands, and was forcibly bent into a ridiculous angle. Frank's pupils constricted. A mutant? Or a superpowered individual? He reacted extremely quickly, releasing the scrapped pistol and drawing his tactical knife with a backhand motion. Chapter 28, Collision between a top-tier assassin and a superpowered girl. Frank instantly released his grip on the ruined pistol with his right hand, his center of gravity dropping sharply. He slid his left foot forward by half a step, cutting into Jessica's blind spot with extreme ferocity. His right hand swept across the outside of his thigh in one smooth motion. Swish! A pitch-black tactical knife fell silently into his palm. Krav Maga, the starting stance for Extreme Close Quarters Combat, CQC, counter-killing. His gaze didn't even look at Jessica's face, instead, it was locked tightly onto the ulnar artery and median nerve on the inside of her right wrist. No matter how great her strength was, once the tendons were severed, the muscle groups would instantly become paralyzed. The blade flipped, tracing an incredibly vicious arc as it slashed upward toward Jessica's wrist. Kicking down the door in the middle of the night and you still dare to pull a knife. Jessica had already been bottling up a belly full of frustration after spending the whole night stitching up dead pork. She didn't care about any tactical positioning. With a cold snort, she casually swiped with her left hand, smashing it directly against the blade of the knife. At the same time, she clenched her right fist, which tore through the air with a shrill whistle, aiming straight for Frank's face. It was pure, overwhelming violence, brute force overcoming all techniques. Frank's eyes narrowed. The terrifying kinetic energy contained in that punch, if it landed, his cervical spine would definitely snap on the spot. Forced to abandon the wrist-slashing move, he held the knife horizontally and bent his left arm to protect his head tightly. Stop! A cold shout devoid of any warmth exploded within the tense clinic. Bang! William slammed the mug printed with "I Love New York" onto the stainless steel triage desk, sending a few drops of bitter, cold coffee splashing onto the surface. He hadn't even buttoned his lab coat, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his gaze sweeping coldly over Frank as if looking at two pieces of dead meat in a morgue. Jugular venous distension, severe cyanosis of the lips, respiratory rate dropped below 4 times per minute. William spoke extremely fast, carrying an unquestionable professional sense of pressure. The toxin has already invaded the cardiac pacemaker. If you delay another 30 seconds, he will suffer irreversible brain death due to ventricular fibrillation. William pointed at Matt, who had been thrown onto the operating table. By then, the only thing you'll be able to do is carry a corpse out of my territory. Frank's movements froze in mid-air. The tactical knife was less than 10 centimeters from Jessica's neck, while Jessica's fist had stopped 2 inches from his temple, the wind from the punch making his cheek sting. Frank turned his head sharply. On the operating table, Matt's condition had reached the absolute worst. Under the dark red cowl, the oozing black blood had already coagulated, and the rise and fall of his chest was so faint it was almost invisible. That dying ho-ho sound was like a rusty, dull saw, frantically tugging at Frank's nerves. He slowly retracted the knife and sheathed it at his thigh. He raised his hands and took half a step back. Save him! Frank's voice was hoarse, permeated with the heavy scent of gunpowder. Whatever you want, I'll give it. Jessica pursed her lips, withdrew her fist, and casually wiped the sweat from her palms onto her jeans, then turned to look at William. William didn't answer immediately. On the edge of his retina, ghostly blue characters were jumping at a frantic frequency. Emergency medical mission, the Daredevil's Lament. Mission requirement, treat Matt Murdock, who is in a near-death state. Mission reward, world-class firearm mastery, includes disassembly, maintenance, ballistic windage calculation, and muscle memory for combat shooting of all calibers of light and heavy weapons. William's heart skipped a beat. World-class firearm mastery. Just a moment ago, in the pouring rain of Gotham City, he had stuffed that batch of Thompson submachine guns and Remington shotguns from the Rat Gang into his storage ring. He had been worrying that as a surgeon used to holding a scalpel, his shooting was entirely dependent on luck. This system was practically spoon-feeding him. Though burning with excitement inside, William didn't let a hint of it show on his face. He pulled out a pair of brand-new, light blue sterile latex gloves and put them on in a leisurely manner. "Jessica, go to cabinet number 2, prepare the endotracheal intubation kit, get 3 doses of epinephrine, 1 dose of atropine, and push the defibrillator over." William strode toward the operating table and issued his orders. Jessica rolled her eyes, but her body was extremely honest as she carried out the order. After several nights of torture, she was intimately familiar with that row of glass instrument cabinets. Frank stood to the side like a statue radiating murderous intent, watching this young Asian doctor. The other person didn't have any aura of a powerhouse, but the moment he stepped onto the operating table, that absolute sense of control actually gave this battle-hardened veteran the illusion of being suppressed. "Cut his clothes open. Fast." William didn't even look up. He grabbed a pair of medical scissors from the instrument tray and tossed them to Frank. Frank caught the scissors and with a few snip sounds, violently cut open Matt's special bulletproof combat suit from the chest. The gruesome wound was exposed under the shadowless lamp. Between the 4th and 5th ribs on the right side was a horrifying, bloody hole. The surrounding skin had already turned a strange, ghostly green, and was terribly swollen. The poison dart had been removed, but the wound was still oozing black blood, accompanied by a very obvious hissing sound of air leakage. Tension pneumothorax. Complicated by high-concentration neurotoxin infection. William's fingers quickly pressed onto Matt's carotid artery. "Pulse is extremely weak. Arrhythmia. It's a variant of Upas tree extract." Frank spoke in a deep voice, providing military intelligence. "The poison dart used by Bullseye. The onset time is less than 10 minutes. Shut up. I don't need you to teach me how to practice medicine." William shouted coldly. His left index and middle fingers were precisely positioned at the second intercostal space of the midclavicular line on Matt's right side. His right hand took the large-bore puncture needle handed over by Jessica. No anesthesia, no disinfection, there was simply no time. Pshhh. The needle pierced vertically into the pleural cavity. An extremely sharp sound of air jetting out rang through the clinic, bringing out a large amount of dark red bloody froth. Matt's right rib cage, which had been raised high, visibly deflated. The pressure from the pneumothorax was relieved, but Matt's complexion did not improve. On the nearby monitor, the heart rate curve suddenly began to shake violently, turning into a row of irregular, jagged waveforms. Beep 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 beep. The shrill alarm blared. Ventricular fibrillation. Jessica's expression changed as she looked at the screen. Although she didn't know medicine, she hadn't memorized those anatomy charts all night for nothing. This waveform meant the heart had lost its pumping function. The toxin has bound to the sodium-potassium pumps of the myocardial cells. William's eyes were cold to the extreme. He ripped open the tattered clothing on Matt's chest, revealing pale skin. Defibrillator. Charge to 360 joules. Jessica quickly pushed the defibrillator into place and pressed the charge button. The machine emitted a low hum. William grabbed the 2 electrode pads and applied conductive gel. Clear. William let out a low roar, pressing the electrode pads heavily onto Matt's chest with both hands. Bang! A powerful electric current instantly pierced through Matt's body. His whole body jerked half a foot off the operating table before slamming back down. The waveform on the monitor drew a long, straight line. Ineffective. Frank's fists were clenched tight, his nails almost piercing his palms. Charge again. 360 joules. William didn't pause for even a second. In the few seconds of gap while charging, William's right hand wiped extremely discreetly inside his lab coat pocket. The storage ring flashed with a faint light. A glass ampoule inside shock-absorbing foam appeared out of thin air in his palm. It contained a pale green fluorescent liquid. This was the remaining Stark Industries specialized targeted cell activator he had used when saving Selina's sister in Gotham. This agent was originally intended to block the inflammatory cytokine cascade, but its core components could forcibly activate the cell's self-repair mechanisms. It was a last-ditch effort. William flicked open the glass cap with one hand and roughly drew the liquid into the syringe. Jessica, intravenous push. William tossed the syringe to Jessica and raised the electrode pads again himself. Jessica caught it, accurately found the vein on the back of Matt's hand, and pushed the entire tube of pale green liquid in. Clear. Bang. The second shock. Matt's body jerked up again. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. The dead straight line on the monitor suddenly twitched, extremely faintly. Immediately after. Beep beep beep. A weak but extremely regular sinus rhythm waveform reappeared on the screen. A dull gasping sound came from Matt's throat, and his cyanotic complexion finally stopped worsening. William let out a long breath of stale air and threw the electrode pads back onto the machine. The back of his lab coat was already soaked with cold sweat. On his retina, the ghostly blue characters froze. Mission completed. Reward distributing. An extremely massive stream of information instantly rushed into William's brain. Countless muscle memories regarding firearm disassembly, ballistic windage calculation, and recoil control were engraved into his central nervous system like a steel stamp. Now, as long as he closed his eyes, he could even clearly perceive the tension of every spring inside an M4A1 rifle. William closed his eyes, took 2 seconds to recover, and suppressed the throbbing pain in his brain. He took off the blood-stained latex gloves and tossed them into the yellow medical waste bin beside his feet. He turned around. William walked up to Frank, and in those dark-circled eyes, that dead water-like calm returned. His life is saved. Follow-up dialysis is needed to clear the residual toxins, and he'll need to stay in the sterile chamber for a few more days. William grabbed a tissue and wiped his hands in a leisurely manner. Now, let's talk about the medical fees. William looked at this Punisher, who was famous throughout Hell's Kitchen, and a brazen, mercenary sneer curled the corner of his lips. My surgery fees are very expensive. Emergency treatment plus the special medicine, that's $100,000 in total. Or equivalent hard currency. No credit. Your gear added together isn't even worth this much. How will you pay? Chapter 29, Deal reached. $100,000. Or equivalent hard currency. No credit. William took off his blood-stained white coat and tossed it into the medical waste bin. His tone was as casual as ordering a $5 burger at a corner fast food joint. Frank stood where he was, his grim face showing no emotion. He was broke. Ever since his family died, his bank accounts had been completely frozen. The tactical vest and M1911 pistol he wore were all stripped from dead men. Let alone $100,000, he couldn't even scrape together $10 for a cab ride right now. But inside Frank's head was the most valuable underground intelligence in all of Hell's Kitchen. Brooklyn 7th Avenue, the bomb shelter below the vent of the abandoned subway station. One of Kingpin's secret safe houses. Frank's voice was hoarse, thick with the smell of blood. There is $3 million in cash inside. The code is 0427. It's yours. William raised his eyelids slightly. There's more, Frank added, upping the ante. Pier 47, container area. There's a shipment of heavy weaponry that leaked from Stark Industries. Armor-piercing rounds, high-explosive grenades, man-portable missiles. I blew up half of it just now, the other half is still there. If you have the ability to move it, it's all yours. The clinic fell into a 2-second dead silence. William turned around, walked to the sink, and turned on the faucet. Cold water washed over his hands. He looked at the eyes with heavy dark circles in the mirror, his heart beating twice with great force. He found drugs dirty. But Stark's heavy weaponry and those 3 million in non-sequential black money were simply a windfall from heaven. With the storage ring, once this shipment of weaponry was stuffed into the subspace, he could turn around, cross that iron door, and dump it directly into Gotham City. Many of the mobsters in Gotham City were still using the Thompson submachine gun and old-fashioned shotguns. They would absolutely offer an irresistible, sky-high price for this era-defining firepower. This deal was a massive profit. Deal. William grabbed a paper towel to dry his hands. If the code is wrong, I'll chop you into 108 pieces and feed you to the turtles in the Hudson River. He turned his head to look at Jessica, who was slumped behind the triage desk. Jessica, get the number 2 debridement kit. Treat his wounds. Use it to practice your suturing skills while you're at it. Jessica rolled her eyes dramatically. She had just been tormented by dead pork all night, and now there was a living person. But the boss had spoken, and the $5,000 monthly salary was still beckoning. She stood up extremely reluctantly, grabbed the tray, and walked toward Frank. Frank said nothing, undoing the buckles of his tactical vest with one hand and taking off his tight combat suit. His lean, muscular upper body was exposed under the dim light. It couldn't even be called skin, it was a physical map pieced together from countless scars, gunshot wounds, and burns. On his left rib, a wound slashed by a dart was still oozing blood. Sit down. Jessica's tone was sharp. She picked up the tweezers holding an alcohol-soaked cotton ball and, without caring about being gentle, rudely shoved it into Frank's wound to clean it. For an ordinary person, this would definitely have caused them to scream in pain. But Frank didn't even frown, his breathing rate remaining steady at 12 times per minute. Your muscles are hard as rocks. Jessica picked up the needle holder. The high-carbon steel suture needle pierced into the flesh, meeting great resistance. Relax, or the needle is going to break again. You're using too much force. The needle entry angle is off. Frank looked down at the wound, coldly pointing out the issue. This isn't mending clothes. You have to pierce along the muscle grain. Shut up. I don't need an old man beaten half to death to teach me how to suture. Jessica's temper flared instantly, and she jerked her wrist with force. Click. The stainless steel suture needle was snapped clean in half by her. Frank looked at the broken needle tip embedded in his flesh, then at the visibly irritable Jessica. He silently extended his left hand, used his fingernails to forcibly dig out the blood-stained needle fragment, and tossed it into the tray. Get another one. Continue. The Punisher's tone remained completely calm. Jessica's mouth twitched. This old guy was an absolute, unadulterated lunatic. At the same time, inside the sterile pod, the ECG monitor emitted an extremely rhythmic beep-beep sound. Matt Murdock opened his eyes abruptly. Beneath the dark red cowl, his eyes remained in a state of dead, silent darkness. But after escaping his near-death state, his super senses were like a rebooted radar, instantly radiating wildly outward. The air was filled with the scent of high-concentration pure oxygen, mixed with an extremely high-end special chemical reagent smell similar to those in Stark Industries laboratories. The ambient temperature was constant at 24 degrees. The mattress beneath him had a faint hydraulic shock absorption feedback. This was not equipment that a regular black market clinic should have. This was a hyperbaric oxygen chamber that only the intensive care units of top-tier private hospitals deserved to possess. His auditory radar began to build a 3D model. 3 meters to the right. A steady heartbeat. Long, measured breathing. It was Frank. Standing next to Frank was a woman. Matt's ears twitched ever so slightly. He heard the muffled sound of muscle fibers contracting when that woman waved her arm. That kind of muscle density and explosive power was definitely not that of an ordinary human, it was even more terrifying than a mutant. Like a lioness dormant beneath human skin. But what terrified Matt the most was the man standing by the sink 5 meters away. William. Matt's sense of smell penetrated the sterile pod's filtration system. He caught a scent that was extremely eerie. Damp. Cold. Carrying a sour, rotten smell of an old industrial city. This was definitely not the smell of the rain in Hell's Kitchen, New York tonight. What was even more terrifying was that beneath this rain smell, it masked an extremely intense scent of blood. As a vigilante who wandered the night all year round, Matt was too sensitive to the smell of blood. That wasn't the blood of 1 or 2 people. It was fresh blood sprayed out from at least a dozen people whose arteries had been instantly severed by an extremely sharp weapon. The time of death was no more than 2 hours ago. And this man, who had killed over a dozen people, had a heartbeat frequency right now that was as steady as a rock. 60 beats per minute. No emotional fluctuation whatsoever. No post-slaughter adrenaline, no fear. Like a precision machine wearing human skin. Matt's hair stood on end. What kind of hellhole had Frank brought him to? This place was even more dangerous than Kingpin's slaughterhouse. He gritted his teeth, braced his hands against the metal bed, and tried to force himself to sit up to warn Frank to leave. Hiss. The explosion-proof glass cover of the sterile pod was pulled open without warning. A hand reached in like lightning, pressing accurately and unerringly onto Matt's right shoulder. Relying on his super senses, Matt had clearly captured the opponent's movement 0.1 seconds in advance, but his fighting and evasion instincts, which he prided himself on, completely failed at this moment. William's technique was too precise. That wasn't fighting, it was like performing a vivisection. His index finger and thumb were like a pair of hydraulic pliers, precisely locking into the depression above the spine of Matt's right scapula. This was the path where the suprascapular nerve passed through. William applied slight pressure with his fingertips. Ugh! A muffled groan escaped Matt's throat. An extremely sour and numb pain, as if thousands of steel needles were stabbing into his bone marrow simultaneously, instantly pierced through his central nervous system. His body, which he had just braced up by half an inch, instantly lost all strength and slammed heavily back onto the mattress. The right side of his body was completely paralyzed. I told you, if you move around again and cause your pneumothorax to recur, not even the gods can save you. William looked down at him from above, his voice ice cold. Matt's left hand grabbed tightly onto the wrist William had pressed onto his shoulder. The tactile feedback from his fingertips made Matt's heart sink to the bottom. This hand was covered in calluses. On the outside of the index finger and the pad of the middle finger, those were pressure marks left from years of holding a scalpel. But on the web between his thumb and index finger, and at the base of his palm, there were deeper, rougher calluses. Those were marks that could only be worn down from years of practicing lethal, one-hit kill techniques. A master of medicine, or a murderous butcher. Who exactly are you? Matt tilted his head up, his dark red mask facing William's direction, his voice hoarse and guarded. You reek of the blood of over a dozen lives, you are no ordinary doctor. William's mouth curled into a mocking, cold sneer. He slowly released the hand pressing down on Matt's shoulder and grabbed a sterile cloth from the side to wipe his fingertips. Who am I? I'm a black market doctor who only recognizes money, not people. William pulled over a swivel chair, sat down, and crossed his legs. That hole in your chest was forcibly stitched up by me using a defibrillator and a special drug that costs $100,000 a vial. Your life is now my asset. Until your friend pays the bill in full, you'd better lie there obediently like a vegetable. Chapter 30, Using a Submachine Gun as a Sniper Rifle. Matt gritted his teeth, just about to retort. Suddenly, his ears twitched ever so slightly. That was the mutated hair cells inside his cochlea capturing ultra-high-frequency sound waves. Matt's complexion instantly shifted from pale to a terrifying, deathly gray. His body, previously limp on the bed, suddenly tensed up like a fully drawn bow. Prepare for combat. Matt squeezed these 4 words through his teeth, his voice distorted by extreme tension. "Bullseye has found us." Frank didn't waste a single word, his tactical knife was unsheathed in an instant. His body pressed against the shadows in the corner like a leopard, his gaze locked firmly onto the clinic's deformed rolling shutter door. 30 people no, 32. Cold sweat slid down Matt's temples as the 3D echo radar map in his brain frantically reconstructed the scene outside. Uniform tactical boots. They've blocked both ends of the street. The sound of HK-416 assault rifle safeties being toggled. A&D. Matt gasped. RPG-7 rocket launchers. They're loading anti-armor warheads. Damn it. Jessica kicked over the triage desk in front of her. The heavy stainless steel table slammed into the concrete floor with a loud crash. Can't a person even sleep in the middle of the night? The security in this dump is worse than a dog's. She ripped a rusty heating pipe off the wall. The cast iron pipe, as thick as an adult's arm, was snapped off by her raw strength, leaving a jagged, uneven edge that looked like a ferocious, heavy blunt weapon. Quiet. William's voice wasn't loud, but it carried an unquestionable penetrating power that instantly quelled Jessica's agitation. He stood up and took off his white coat, revealing a deep black turtleneck sweater underneath. He didn't look at the rolling shutter door that could be blown to pieces at any moment. Instead, he walked straight to the row of iron storage lockers deep in the clinic used for medicine. With his back to everyone, a faint light flashed from the dark silver ring at the base of William's right index finger. Clang! Clang! A few muffled metallic clanking sounds. William turned around with a few things in his hands. He tossed them over. Catch! Frank instinctively reached out to catch them. He looked down, and the corner of his mouth twitched violently. A Remington M870 military shotgun stained with mud and blood. And a similarly filthy Thompson submachine gun. These were all spoils of war that William had seized from the rat gang dead in the East District of Gotham City just a while ago. What era do these antiques belong to? Frank gripped the Thompson, feeling as if he had returned to a World War II museum. Although this gun had fierce firepower, its recoil was astonishingly high, and its accuracy was abysmal. In this tactical era of uniform HK-416s, it was practically a useless piece of junk. William ignored him, holding a Thompson of his own. The moment he gripped the handle, in his mind, the world-class firearm mastery just granted by the system rushed into his nervous system like a floodgate opening. Muscle memory, skeletal force habits, and ballistic windage calculation formulas fused perfectly with this body within a tenth of a second. William closed his eyes. Click. His thumb pressed the magazine release button, his left hand caught the falling drum magazine, and he tapped it against his leg to check the follower spring tension. His right index finger hooked the charging handle and pulled it back all the way. Clack! A crisp mechanical locking sound. William's technique was so fast that only after images could be seen. There wasn't a single wasted movement, not a hint of hesitation. These were not actions a normal person could perform. This was the muscle instinct that could only be formed by a top-tier marksman who treated firearms as an extension of their own body and had rolled through piles of the dead for over a decade. Frank's hand holding the knife paused. His gaze was nailed to William's thumb as he ejected the magazine. 0.4 seconds. This was a level of fluidity that even the top CQB instructors of the Navy SEALs couldn't achieve. The gun is old, but as long as it can kill, it's fine. William opened his eyes, his black pupils revealing absolute coldness. He held the submachine gun in one hand, the muzzle pointing diagonally at the ground. Jessica, go to the back door. No matter who comes in, use that iron pipe in your hand to smash their head into their chest cavity. Frank, the right ventilation duct. There are 7 buckshot rounds in the shotgun. Your task is to seal off any living thing that tries to approach the window. As for the front door, William walked behind the load-bearing wall to the side of the rolling shutter door, his back pressing against the cold red bricks. Leave it to me. The instructions were clear, the distribution perfect. It was a textbook deployment for indoor special operations defense. Outside, the rain poured down like a deluge. Bullseye stood in the middle of the street, letting the rain wash over his signature black combat suit. He toyed with a refined steel dart coated in neurotoxin, his eyes staring viciously at the dilapidated sign of 22 Lake Street. The boss said to wipe out the people and the clinic together. Bullseye grinned, revealing his stark white teeth. He raised his right hand and swung it down violently. Boom! The gangster carrying the RPG pulled the trigger without hesitation. The tail flame spat out over 2 meters long in the rainy night, and the anti-armor warhead, trailing an orange-red wake, headed straight for the clinic's rolling shutter door. At the exact 10,000th of a second that the RPG fired. Inside the clinic, William didn't even peek out to look. Relying on the sound of the air tearing at the moment the warhead left the muzzle, he instantly locked onto the trajectory in his mind. Bang! The muzzle of the Thompson submachine gun in William's hand poked half an inch out from the gap Frank had kicked open at the bottom of the rolling shutter door. A single shot burst. A .45 caliber brass bullet tore through the rain curtain. It didn't hit the high-speed rocket, nor did it hit the shooter. Instead, with extreme precision, it crossed the 30-meter distance and struck a spot 3 inches below the fuel tank cap of an abandoned Ford sedan across the street. Because of severe rust, the metal there was as thin as a cicada's wing. The bullet pierced the metal, rubbing violently against the gasoline vapor inside. Kaboom! The Ford sedan instantly transformed into a violent fireball, and a massive shockwave swept across the narrow street. The RPG rocket, which had flown less than 10 meters, had its trajectory forced off course by the blast wave. With a whoosh, it grazed the roof of the clinic and slammed into an abandoned warehouse on the next street, exploding with a muffled sound. Damn! Is there a sniper? The gangsters outside were in chaos. Sniper my ass! That was a stray bullet. Bullseye slapped his subordinate, the white target pattern on his forehead twisting in the firelight. Suppressive fire! Tear that door down for me! 30 HK416s opened fire simultaneously. The dense rain of bullets, like a metal storm, instantly shredded the rolling shutter door into rags. The screeching sound of ricochets echoed frantically inside the clinic, the shadowless lamp was shattered, and glass shards splattered everywhere. Fire suppression, they'll advance in 3 seconds. Frank shouted from under the ventilation duct. He was all too familiar with this tactic. No need to wait 3 seconds. William took a deep breath. He suddenly flashed out from behind the load-bearing wall. No invisibility cloak, no operating table to use as cover. His legs were slightly bent, his center of gravity extremely low, and the Thompson submachine gun in his hands was pressed firmly into his shoulder pocket. Da-da-da-da-da. William held the trigger down. At this distance, the Thompson's terrifying rate of fire and the stopping power of the .45 caliber bullets were pushed to the limit. But even more terrifying was William's recoil control. Despite the intense recoil, the muzzle didn't jump upward in the slightest. His muscles were like precision hydraulic dampers, absorbing all the vibrations perfectly. The trajectory wasn't a scattered area, but an extremely precise horizontal line, like a scythe swung by the god of death, sweeping across at the height of the car windows that served as cover for those on the street. Pft! 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 Blood blossoms bloomed one after another in the rainy night. 3 gangster machine gunners who were just about to peek out to shoot didn't even manage to scream, their skull caps were blown clean off. Brain matter mixed with rainwater splattered onto the red brick wall nearby. Absolute fire suppression. Not relying on the gun, but on the person. Bullseye hid behind a bulletproof SUV, his face dark enough to drip water. He looked at the 3 mutilated corpses on the ground, the corner of his eye twitching violently. The intelligence said this was just a back alley clinic. But the way that guy inside shot and his suppressive power were even more terrifying than that lunatic Frank. Throw flashbangs. Close quarters combat. Bullseye changed tactics. What he was best at was never lining people up for execution, but lethal close-range throwing. Several cylindrical flashbangs were thrown into the clinic's dilapidated doorway. "Close your eyes. Open your mouth," Frank roared. Blinding white light and a deafening roar capable of piercing eardrums exploded inside the room. Taking advantage of this gap, 5 gangster assault troopers leveled their guns and rushed into the clinic, stepping on the shattered glass covering the floor. But what they were met with were not lambs waiting to be slaughtered that had lost the ability to resist. Whoosh! A violent gust of wind attacked from the side. Jessica had her eyes closed, she didn't need to see. Relying on the sound of footsteps, she swung that cast-iron heating pipe, as thick as an adult's arm, and smashed it fiercely into the chest of the assault trooper in front, just like swinging a baseball bat. Crack! A teeth-grinding sound of bone shattering. The man's bulletproof vest was useless, his entire chest cavity instantly caved in, forming an exaggerated deep pit. The whole person flew backward like a cannonball, knocking over 2 companions behind him, and spat out a high spray of blood mixed with organ fragments. Monsters, what the fuck kind of monsters are these? The remaining 2 assault troopers were scared out of their wits, just about to turn their guns. Bang! Bang! 2 deafening shotgun roars. Frank poked his body out from the ventilation duct, the Remington M870 spewing out a large cloud of gunpowder gas. Countless steel pellets spread in a fan shape at extremely close range, directly turning the upper bodies of those 2 into hornets' nests. The first wave of assault was completely wiped out.